views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Hey there, it's time for the Bronx Buzz, and I am thrilled because the reason this program was created was for you, the people of the Bronx, and me in part, get a chance to hear what local writers and reporters and editors have to say about some of the things they're writing about. It helps you to get closer to them and also find out what they're thinking about in the back of their minds. And the reason I'm excited is today we have two of the top flight people in the borough of the Bronx. Anthony Capote from the Riverdale Press, welcome back to the show.
Thank you.
We can say that Anthony took a little sabbatical and he was away, and we all paid the price because we didn't get to read what he was writing, but he's back now and we're going to grill him a little bit. And our good friend David Cruz, who's the editor of the very popular Norwood newspaper, is also with us. Thank you, David, for joining us.
Thank you.
Both have been here before. Have you been on together before?
No.
Oh, really? All right. We're trying every combination we can get together. We were just talking about this, and it is complicated. So, Anthony, you wrote the story in the Riverdale Press about, we're getting right to it, folks. No BSing around. We're getting right to the news. About this idea of a constitutional convention, which the meeting was held here in the Bronx. But tell me about what this is all about.
Sure. So there's automatically on the ballot every 20 years, New Yorkers get a chance to vote on a referendum on whether or not they want to hold a constitutional convention. And essentially, a constitutional convention is not like the one in Philadelphia that they had all that like 250 or so years ago, but
where they established something called the Constitution of the United States of America. Yeah,
you know, some old guys were there with powdered wigs. It was
they weren't old at the time.
Yeah, but so they a constitutional convention in New York would essentially mean that if people voted yes in November, in 2018, they would vote on 3 delegates from each Senate district, state Senate district, and 15 delegates at large. And then for the next year, those delegates would get together and rewrite effectively the New York State Constitution. And pretty much anything is up for grabs, and they can change
anything that you want to change as far as changing the law, the Constitution of the state of New York.
Yeah.
When was the last time this was held in the state of New York and we had a change?
So the last time that a constitutional convention was held was in 1967. But the last time that a convention was held and a constitution was ratified was way back in 1938.
Wow. In 67, do you know, I don't know if it was in the story, but do you know what they were deliberating at that time?
Yeah, at that time there was some talk about labor rights and sort of expanding them in a way that what ended up happening was that people like Citizens Union at the end of the ratification process said, well, we don't actually like how few more rights you gave and how few things you expanded. And so they actually, it was that support that sort of pushed it over the edge of not getting ratified.
We were talking about it earlier. Among the things that would be transgender rights, campaign finance, things that the legislature has not been able to get together. And in the dialogue that we just had before, you made it very clear that, and it's a very good question, if they can't get it through the legislature now to get, whether it be civil rights of some sort, or certainly the campaign finance or an ethics package of some sort, if they can't get through the legislature now, what makes anybody think that if there are 3 delegates from each senatorial district, the thing is going to be highly politicized, that they'll be able to get it done?
Now,
Did I just ask the question that you wanted to
right,
pose?
right. That's
Yeah.
sort of, but I guess the point that advocates are making is that just by nature of the fact that they are voted by general election, and there are those 15 at-large delegates, and there are like 2-to-1 progressives to conservatives in the state of New York, even though Republicans control the state Senate.
That maybe it's another way of pushing something
Exactly.
forward. David, I know that's not your story, but do you have in your mind the kinds of things that could be put on the kind of agenda for the Constitutional Convention?
I would definitely think that there would be some kind of protections for minorities this time around. I mean, I did read the article, and there seems to be a lot on the agenda right now. I mean, if it comes every 20 years, you could rest assured that those who are pushing for the Constitutional Convention definitely want to see the New York's Constitution modernized a little bit more to sort of just.
So your thing would be civil rights.
Absolutely.
You think that would be something that people would want to see on there? Let's talk to you about some of the stuff. I mean, there's just so much stuff. This is not going to take a lot of our time today. But there's this story that came out just the other day about vandals removing crypts from the Woodlawn Cemetery. How macabre and bizarre is that? Other than just pure vandalism, what could be the motive unless they had some agenda with somebody's corpse?
Well, these corpses were actually just simply removed. They weren't actually taken. They were simply just removed from the mausoleum.
Disturbed.
They were essentially disturbed. That's why I sort of started the little tongue-in-cheek lead that, so much for resting in peace. Only because they essentially were moved outside the mausoleum. It's essentially a family. They were all sort of buried within the mausoleum.
Are any of the people, any survivors from that family around who came and said, "Oh my goodness, what happened to our?"
No, the only thing when I went over there was essentially a big police presence, mainly just detectives who were there, who were essentially just trying to figure out what exactly could have happened, especially since none of them were actually stolen, which was kind of bizarre.
It's just a strange.
It was broad daylight too.
Unless we start seeing a trend, God forbid, of some sort. I just thought it was interesting to mention because it just seems it's
a very, very unusual kind of story.
But this is the next story that you have written about, which is actually on the front page of the Norwood News as we speak, is this idea that Sam's floor covering, which is kind of a legendary, carpet store, floor store in the Bronx, they're talking about building it up and putting a shelter over there. And much like dialogues that have gone on in Anthony's coverage area, there's a lot of discussion about, now we're building another shelter in our neighborhood. Your thoughts?
Well, the reason why this particular shelter is disturbing to some is for two reasons. One, the main reason is that it's across the street from PS MS 20, and it's a school. It's heavily there's definitely a traveled school. A lot of kids actually go to the school, and they would have to pass Sam's in order to go to the school. And mostly residents are worried that a lot of the homeless would be milling around. They simply just don't know where the homeless are coming from. So there's essentially a fear factor there. And then also the fact that Sam's on Webster Avenue, and Webster Avenue has been primed for a long-term visioning, revisioning
that particular location.
Correct.
Does Sam's want to keep the property?
Sam is essentially filing all the paperwork to convert the property into a shelter. And I looked at the paperwork through the Department of Buildings website, and they are looking to build another floor on top of the existing two-story structure, simply because they would want to create a 200-plus, I don't know if it's a men's shelter, but 200 beds essentially for that particular property.
This just opens up so many important issues in the Bronx. The first of them, which maybe other people didn't think about, if Sam's floor covering was doing better as a business, he would not be looking elsewhere to make a big play.
But the thing is, though, the city of New York, they pay top dollar for this kind of property.
So it doesn't matter what he's doing with his business, he would want that.
Yeah,
all right, so now let's go to Anthony, your editor, Michael Hinman, who was here last week, wrote an editorial about I'm going to extrapolate from it, but basically, what's wrong with people? Homeless people need homes. They're not bad people. They're just people who don't happen to have homes. Yet the fear in your area about whether it be North Broadway or whether the new conversation that's happening at 234th Street and Broadway has just riled up communities. And believe me, if I start talking about the East Bronx or the South Bronx or up there in Wakefield, everybody in the Bronx is talking about this. So what is your point of view about either this, the ones in your district? It's a major thing.
You know, it's interesting because every situation is a little bit different. And obviously, as we were talking about before the show, the mayor wants to get away from his cluster center plan right now. He needs to get, he wants to get homeless people out of places like the Van Cortlandt Motel, for example, where the Van Cortlandt Motel has no business housing families, right?
Right. Barely has the facility. On the other hand, as David said, they're getting top dollar. We're taking the business. On the other hand, the families are not really, their lives are not improved because they're being housed over there.
Right. Now, in Riverdale, for example, in Kingsbridge is really where the building is. This building going up by Stag Group is a transitional housing center. It's where places are going to be, people and families are going to be living for a couple of months at a time at least. And where Michael's editorial came from was essentially there's a lot of reasons, I think, to be questionable of developers, especially when a developer says, oh, I have this great idea and it's going to help a lot of people. And everybody should be skeptical of that because they're developers.
Well, let me just interject. There's no question that they started with one thing with market rate, and then by which the Stag Group apparently has done all over the borough,
Right.
And then of course changes their mind. That starts to take the argument of, hey, why don't you be fair out of it? Go ahead, Dave.
I was going to say about the Stag Group is that the Stag Group has been building a lot within Norwood as well. They are actually building a 10-story property on Webster Avenue, not too far away from the shelter, and they're actually building another.
You said that wrong. It's not a shelter yet.
Not a shelter yet, that's true. They're proposed
You
shelter.
could thank Gary for helping catch you on that. Go ahead.
And they're also building another facility building another supposedly affordable housing complex right near Grand Concourse and Marshall. But now people are essentially skeptical of Stag because of what happened in Riverdale. Now they're sort of just second guessing.
Is there, and then we're going to take a break, but is there any protection for the public, not only for the Stag Group, but any developer who promises one thing and then switches? Or it sounds to me like if you sign a deal or make an agreement.
Well, you could change the terms of the deal. I mean,
Right.
so long as you just give back the money that you were supposed to go give, you got from the state or from the city, what have you, then all bets are off.
And I can tell from Anthony's face, he's looking at me and saying, oh, Gary, you're so naive.
Yeah, that's like saying that the city needs to listen to community boards when they tell them anything.
There's
And,
no contract between
yeah.
the community board and themselves.
Just for fun, prediction of what's going to happen there?
They'll likely pick another site that they
You think the opposition is strong enough to move the thing around?
chances are probably, yeah.
Also, because building on top of a structure gets very complicated.
Well, also because the nonprofit developer hasn't necessarily broached the developer yet.
Real quick, your prediction about 5731 Broadway, is that the one?
I'm pretty sure it's happening.
It's happening. There's nothing to say.
The contract, I'm pretty sure was
Well,
approved.
we're gonna take a break. I'm gonna summarize this segment and put my own 2 cents in, and that is, if in fact people without homes are housed there or even in a transitional way, I hope they do well. I hope the community supports them and they find places to live, and that it doesn't ruin people's value, property values. That's my hope. And again, maybe you could say, well, Gary's so naive, but I hear all this stuff, I hear it all the time, and I'm hoping that's the bottom line. So our guests are David Cruz from the Norwood News, Anthony Capote from the Riverdale Press, and we and you and they will take a break, and then we'll come right back.
Sure, I look cute now, but when my owner lost his job, it was rough. I was living on the street, and one night, me and this Cocker Spaniel got into it so bad, I wound up looking like an ice cream cone. I cried a little bit, but they Thankfully, I got rescued, so I'm running, I'm jumping, all back to my old self. And I'm ready to give unconditional love, even if you put a lampshade on my head.
It's not always easy being a dad.
Do you have panda asthma too? Does that run in the family? This is the home of the most priceless kung fu artifacts.
But when you make an effort,
Dad, we're not supposed to touch anything. Oh, sorry. Go along, son.
it's always worth it.
Whoa!
The smallest moments can have the biggest impact on a child's life. Take time to be a dad today.
I am gonna get you. I'm gonna get you.
Call 877-4DAD-411 or visit fatherhood.gov to learn more.
Oh my God, go! Oh, Shane, look out!
Hamilton was adopted from a rescue in 2008. He really likes to be around people. And as soon as I start to make my breakfast, Hamilton is right there. I get out my mat and I'm doing a downward dog and he's underneath. He's quite the pug about town. He gets invited to a lot of parties. He knows he's a pretty big deal. I mean, look at this little face. How could you not love him?
Okay, back with you on the Bronx Buzz. It is Anthony Capote from the Riverdale Press and David Cruz from the Norwood News. We've got a lot of really interesting, so which one am I doing next? I got 100 different stories next. Let's start with you, Anthony, and you wrote a story about the Assemblyman Dinowitz. Says he has a tax plan to fix the MTA. Now, this came after the mayor talking about his tax plan, which I thought was dead on arrival. There's no way the mayor can say that we're going to, tax people with whatever it was, $500,000 income, because he has no control over that.
Yeah.
But what do you think about what the Assemblyman is proposing?
Well, Mayor de Blasio's millionaire's tax has been dead on arrival ever since he first proposed it years ago.
That's a redundant statement. But
Yeah, but just to add to that, that's a ridiculous concept that he's not going to pass. But Dinowitz's plan is actually pretty interesting, and his point is that the state should earmark 2% of all state income taxes for transit around the state. So not just the MTA, but buses in Albany, and not just buses in Albany, but the roads in Cooperstown.
Wow.
And his point is that it puts money around the whole state, so no one can feel like they're getting gypped.
Right. In other words, the people, the upstaters, are always like, oh, they needed $5 billion in New York City. We don't get that. So that's an interesting thought.
Yeah. Of course, people who have expressed concern with it are saying, well, if you earmark money, if you say that this money is always going to go to this one place, then it hurts new ideas and new projects moving forward that they may want to put into future budgets.
If you do that, you could conceivably, and maybe it's not wrong, look at all different things in that way and say, education needs a certain percentage or, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. You could do that. You think this is a good trend? You like the trend?
Honestly, it is hard to say because I do agree with what you're saying. A lot of upstaters may actually think that this tax may just simply benefit what's happening downstate.
Well, there's no question New York will get the bulk of it, that kind of thing.
Well, of course, but at the same time, if you want to be equitable,
yes, of course.
What's in it for the folks
Per
upstate?
capita. But listen, road repair in New York City and the borough of the Bronx wouldn't be the worst thing either. So what do you think?
Well, I mean, I don't know what kind of support he would get on the Senate side, of course, and clearly Cuomo needs some kind of an alternative simply because he just does not like the millionaire's tax. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, the proposal is very interesting. It's interesting the fact that Dinowitz has been sort of traveling outside the Bronx to tout this and not really sort of having his announcements here in the borough. So.
Well, but it's a citywide thing. Do you think it has any traction? Have you heard from anybody?
I asked Dinowitz, and he sort of said, yeah, well, we're not in session yet, so I'm reaching out to people, and some people are with it, some people aren't. On the upside, this is something where Dinowitz does have some legislative power. He's the chair of the committee in the assembly that controls the MTA. So this is something where he can go to his committee and tell Democrats, this is what I want to push.
Interesting test for the assemblyman. We followed his career for a long time, and he undertakes issues. He supports gun control. He's been against trafficking. I mean, these are things that are, labeled right next to his name. And I'd have to ask him to find out for sure. This may be the first real kind of major statewide overhaul that he is behind. And he's certainly got enough longevity to be, and certainly a relationship with the Speaker of the Assembly to be able to move some forward. Be interesting session to see what happens.
I agree.
Dave, let's talk to you now about this. I was saving it for last, the best for last. The fact that Bronx Community College removed Confederate statues. I guess it was Robert E. Lee and Andrew Jackson from...
Well, not Andrew Jackson. It was the other Confederate general, Stonewall.
Oh, Stonewall.
Yeah.
Sorry, not Andrew Jackson, Stonewall Jackson.
Right.
You're correct, I'm sorry. From the Hall of Fame, the Walk of Fame. No, it's the Hall of Fame at the Bronx Community College. This has created just an immense uproar across America, not only for Bronx Community College, but the whole concept. Any thoughts about it?
Well, right. I mean, a lot of people definitely are sort of like divided on this because on one hand, you look at it on a historical context, the fact that he is a historical figure, and it's sort of by removing him, it's sort of like you're sort of whitewashing history a little bit. And I don't think within the Bronx, the Hall of Fame, although like sort of the name implies that they're famous, but they're not saying that they're infamous.
Yeah, that's very good way to put it. Did you write that? I didn't see you.
No, I didn't write that in.
You should have. It was very good.
So, but on the other hand, obviously, because of what happened over in Virginia with these neo-Nazi protests and the white supremacist protests, it looked as if it was not, within the best interests of the Bronx to actually have it there.
The dialogue is absolutely everywhere across the country.
Well, now they're talking about Christopher Columbus.
Well, I'll bring that up in a second. Let's just start with this idea of these two that were removed from Bronx Community College. What are your thoughts?
Personally, having grown up in the South, because I'm from Miami originally, and like sort of by extension, the southern areas of the state of Florida, and I think the main issue is that a lot of these statues, particularly in the South, went up in the Jim Crow era. They went up to celebrate racism, and I'm not saying
although the one at BCC did not. Although, by the way, a little trivia: people may or may not know that the Baseball Hall of Fame was named after this Hall of Fame. This was the first Hall of Fame
it is
in the country.
Right.
So there you go.
But I think that at BCC the question has to become, is there any sort of Southern pride to be had at the Bronx Community College?
That's interesting.
And I don't really think
so. Here's a couple of points, and I've brought them up personally on my own Facebook page and elsewhere. In Germany, Nazi symbols are illegal. You can't use them. I mean, obviously it's part of German history. It's a very unfortunate and horrible part of German history, but they don't want to have it there. And then I was thinking the other day, I saw a news story, and it actually was in Florida, as a matter of fact, where somebody had used the N-word and painted it across the stone facade of a black family's home, and it was, of course, immediately painted over and whatever. Were they whitewashing history at that time? In other words, this was historical, this had happened, but it was obviously unpleasant, it was offensive to some people, and maybe I don't think anybody would disagree, unless you believe in that sort of thing, that it should have been taken down. Go ahead.
The problem is if you begin to look at the issue a lot closely, especially with all these historical figures, not all of them were angels. I mean, even even you could say that President John F. Kennedy was a womanizer who just constantly cheated.
Yeah.
Same with Dr. Martin Luther
Listen,
King.
we know
who
that
was
Washington
an
and Jefferson owned slaves.
correct.
On the other
It's
hand,
a slippery slope at that point, right?
Right, right. Well, I want to weigh in on something else, and you suggested it, and I held you off. But I thought what Mayor de Blasio proposed, that he was going to put a task force together to evaluate all statues in the city, all historical artifacts, and kind of do a review of everything, which in the article that I read about it said, as you mentioned, that the Christopher Columbus statue on Columbus Circle could potentially be in danger. I thought two things. One is it's going too far because we don't need to do that. The idea is to make your point, to get things out of the way that are offensive. Some of that stuff nobody would even notice. And number two, it makes him an easy target for people who disagree with the idea of removing statues because it's frankly I thought it was just outlandish. Why go there, make yourself a target, and give opponents of what you believe in a reason to dump on you? I just thought it was a bad political move. Go ahead.
I think that I don't think that there's necessarily a problem with examining whether or not certain statues need to be taken down, right? Like in Spuyten Duyvil Park, there's a statue of Henry Hudson with 2 Native Americans kneeling at his feet. And that sends a very odd, very outdated message.
I know this statue. I never realized that was there.
Yes, and that's the thing. And we actually got a letter to the editor about it just this week, where someone said, like, that is offensive, right? Christopher Columbus, who A, never set foot in what became the United States, and B, was a genocidist, maybe he doesn't deserve a statue in Columbus Circle. And
well, then what are you going to do? Take his name off Columbus Circle? Call it Axel Bank Square, as far as I'm concerned.
Maybe we should, but I don't think. But what I don't think is that it's not a conversation worth having. And in particular, I think it's worse. It's a worse whitewashing of history if we say things that aren't true. Like if we
or
don't
tacitly accept it.
Exactly. So if we don't say, well, yes, Christopher Columbus committed genocide in Latin America and thought it was totally okay, and if we don't say that guys like Robert E. Lee and Stonewall Jackson were fighting for the institution of slavery so that they could keep it in place, then that is a worse whitewashing, and that's the sort of thing that happens in schools.
I personally would just love to know if they are actually creating this task force, whether or not they'd look at the historical context on why these sculptures, these busts, these statues were created in the first place. Was it
and so were there kind of noble or historical reasons for it? But listen, there's no question that the BCC statues were historical reasons, and frankly, the borough president and others weighed in immediately and said, take them down. I think it's a healthy dialogue for America to have to examine its sense of value. We got to go. David Cruz from the Norwood News, thank you so much. Anthony Capote from the Riverdale Press, thank you so much. This is why we bring them on here, to have real dialogue about real items. We'll see you in print pretty soon, I guess. Right? Take care. We'll see you Monday night. We're going to have a big debate. It'll be the debate for the 14th City Council District. Both these guys are going to cover it, so you better be there too.
Who said that?
I made you do it.
We are there. Day 1.